I never believed in any of that urban legend nonsense until what happened in the backcountry of eastern Oregon in 2001. Even now, 25 years later, I still wake up some nights hearing that sound, like a runaway engine made of muscle and rage tearing through the trees. What I'm about to tell you isn't some barroom story or social media stunt. This really happened. And the only reason I'm finally talking about it is because I figure enough time has passed that maybe nobody's watching anymore. My name's Tom. Back in '97, I was working land clearing contracts all over the Northwest: Montana, Idaho, northern Washington. Decent money, hard work, nothing I couldn't handle. I'd been doing it for about 6 years when Roy called me in late August. Roy was the foreman I'd worked under on maybe a dozen jobs. Solid guy, knew his business, didn't waste words. "Got something unusual," he said. "Montana, near the Canadian border. They need a crew for about 3 weeks, maybe a month." I asked him what made it unusual. "The pay," he said. There was a pause I didn't like. "Triple rate." Triple rate meant something was wrong. You don't pay that kind of money unless the work is dangerous, illegal, or nobody else will take it. I asked him which one it was. "None of the above, far as I can tell," Roy said. "Just remote. Real remote. And they want it done fast." I should have pressed him harder right then. But I was young, and triple pay sounded like 6 months of work crammed into one. So I said yes. Roy told me to meet him in Kalispell in 4 days. He'd already lined up 7 other guys. Ben, our mechanic, Mike and Danny, 2 brothers from Spokane, and a few others I'd never worked with. 9 of us total. When I got to the rendezvous point, a guy in a gray suit was waiting with Roy. Not work clothes, a suit. In the middle of nowhere, Montana. He didn't give us his name, just handed Roy a folder with coordinates, a sat phone, and a cash advance in an envelope thick enough to choke on. "Equipment's already there," the man said. "Camp set up, food stocked. You just need to clear the grid we marked and stay on schedule." One of the new guys, a kid named Jake, asked what they were building. The man in the suit smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Future power line infrastructure, routine work." That was the first lie. I didn't know it yet, but I felt it. We drove in 2 trucks for nearly 5 hours, the last 2 on logging roads so old they barely qualified as roads. When we finally reached the site, the sun was setting behind the mountains, and the camp was right where he said it'd be. Canvas tents, a cooking station, generators, fuel drums, tools. All of it laid out like someone had been expecting us for weeks. Ben walked around the equipment, running his hand along a brand new chainsaw, still in its protective wrap. "This stuff's top of the line," he said quietly. "Who sets up a camp like this and then hires Iron to run it?" Nobody had an answer. But we were tired, and the money was real, so we didn't ask many questions. That first night, we ate from the pre-stocked supplies, joked around the fire, and turned in early. The forest around us was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. But back then, I just thought it was peaceful. I didn't realize yet that the silence wasn't peace. It was absence. The first couple of days went smooth. We cleared brush, marked trees, ran survey lines through the forest according to the coordinates they'd given us. The work itself wasn't complicated, just standard land prep. But something felt off from the start, and it took me a while to figure out what it was. It was Ben who said it out loud on the 3rd morning. "You guys notice there's no birds?" We were standing near the edge of the clearing, drinking coffee before the day's work started. I looked up at the trees. He was right. No birdsong, no crows, no jays, nothing. In a forest that thick, that old, you should hear dozens of species. But the canopy was silent. Mike, one of the Spokane brothers, laughed it off. "Maybe we scared him away with the chainsaws." "We haven't even started cutting yet," Ben said. That stuck with me. I started paying attention after that. No squirrels. No deer tracks near the stream. No insects buzzing around the cooking area at night. It was like the animals had abandoned this place long before we arrived. I didn't say anything though. Didn't want to sound paranoid. But I could tell I wasn't the only one noticing. The nights were worse. After the generators shut down and we killed the lights, the silence became absolute. You know how a forest is supposed to sound at night? Wind in the branches, distant animal calls, the rustle of something small moving through the underbrush. We had none of that. Just dead air, so thick it felt like the trees were holding their breath. On the fourth night, Danny came back from taking a leak and said he'd felt watched. Roy told him to quit spooking himself, but I saw the way Danny kept glancing toward the tree line the rest of the evening. He wasn't joking. The next morning, I was hauling equipment down to the lower grid when I found the footprints. They were near the river, in a patch of wet clay that had stayed soft overnight. At first I thought they were human, barefoot, maybe someone from camp walking around drunk. But when I crouched down to look closer, my stomach dropped. They were shaped like feet, sure, but they were huge. Easily twice the size of my boot, maybe bigger. And the toes were wrong, too long, spread too far apart, almost like fingers. The depth of the prints suggested something unbelievably heavy. And they didn't meander or stumble. They ran in a straight line along the edge of the camp perimeter, spaced evenly, deliberately, like something had been pacing, watching. I looked up at the tree line and felt my skin crawl. Whatever made those tracks had been close, real close, and we'd been asleep. I should have told Roy right then, but I didn't. Maybe I thought he'd laugh at me. Maybe I didn't want to believe it myself. So I just stood there, staring at those prints, trying to convince myself there was a rational explanation. That's when I heard the branch snap behind me. I spun around fast enough to nearly lose my footing. Nothing there. Just trees and shadows and that suffocating silence. But I knew what I'd heard. Something big had stepped on that branch. Something that didn't want to be seen, but didn't care if I knew it was there. I got back to camp faster than I probably should have, trying not to look like I was running. Roy was going over the day's work orders with a couple of the guys. I almost told him about the prints. Almost. But when I opened my mouth, something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the forest felt like it was listening. So I just grabbed my gear and got to work. That night, things started disappearing. It was small stuff at first. Jake couldn't find his headlamp. One of the battery packs for the tools went missing from the charging station. Roy figured we were just being careless, spreading things around the camp. "Tighten it up," he said. "We're not here to play hide and seek with our own equipment." But the next morning, one of the chainsaws was gone. Not misplaced, gone. We searched the whole camp. Ben checked the equipment logs. It had been locked in the storage container the night before. The container was still locked, but the chainsaw wasn't inside. "Maybe someone forgot to log it out," Mike suggested, but his voice was thin. Nobody believed that. Roy inspected the lock. It was still engaged, still functional. But when Ben looked closer, he noticed something that made his face go pale. The metal hasp was bent. Not broken or cut, bent. Like something had simply squeezed it until the lock popped free, then pressed it back into place. "What the hell kind of strength would that take?" Ben muttered. Roy didn't answer. He just told us to buddy up when we left camp, and to keep the remaining equipment inside the tents at night. Nobody argued. That's when the company sent the drone. A guy arrived in a black SUV late that afternoon. No introduction, no small talk. He unloaded a commercial-grade surveillance drone, the kind with thermal imaging and night vision. "We're concerned about equipment security," he said, like that explained anything. He set it to auto-patrol the perimeter and left before sunset. We all felt a little better that night. Something was watching over us, even if we didn't know what we were watching for. The drone hummed overhead in a wide circle, its blinking lights cutting through the darkness. At 2 a.m., it crashed. The sound woke half the camp, a sickening crunch of rotors and plastic slamming into the ground near the equipment shed. Roy and I got there first with flashlights. The drone was totaled. Propellers warped like they'd hit a wall at full speed. The casing was cracked clean through. But here's the part that didn't make sense. The damage wasn't from a fall. It was from impact. Something had hit it, hard, mid-flight. Roy pulled the camera's SD card, and we watched the footage on Ben's laptop. Most of it was just trees and darkness. Then, in the final 10 seconds, the camera jerked violently upward as something rose into frame. The footage was grainy, the night vision struggling, but I saw it. A dark shape, massive, moving faster than anything that size should move. It leapt, maybe 12, 15 feet straight up, and swatted the drone out of the air like it was annoyed. The last frame before the feed cut out showed an arm, long, impossibly long. And then, nothing. Ben closed the laptop without a word. Nobody slept after that. The next day, Roy called the sat phone number we'd been given. He told whoever answered about the drone, the missing equipment, the bent locks. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. They said they'd look into it and told us to continue working. Roy argued. The voice reminded him how much we were being paid and suggested we'd signed contracts. Then the line went dead. Roy stood there holding the phone for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he said, "We finished the grid. 2 more weeks, then we're out." But 2 weeks felt like a lifetime right then, and I think we all knew something had changed. We weren't just being watched anymore. We were being tested. The work slowed down. Guys kept looking over their shoulders. We moved in groups now, nobody wandering off alone. The silence of the forest had become oppressive, like a weight pressing down on us. I started to notice we were talking less too, as if we were afraid our voices might attract attention. On the 6th day, the fog rolled in. It came from nowhere, thick and gray, swallowing the mountains and pouring down into the valley where we were camped. By mid-morning, you couldn't see 20 feet. Roy called off work. Too dangerous to operate equipment when you can't see what you're cutting. We sat around camp, tense, waiting for it to clear. That's when Mike went to check the fence line. He said he'd be 10 minutes. We'd strung up a perimeter of caution tape and reflective markers earlier in the week, more for our own navigation than anything else. Mike wanted to make sure the fog hadn't knocked any of it down. Danny offered to go with him, but Mike waved him off. "It's 50 yards, I'll be fine." I remember the way he said it, confident, almost annoyed that we were babying each other. He was gone for maybe 5 minutes when we heard him start running. Not jogging, running, crashing through underbrush, boots hammering the ground, his breathing ragged and panicked even from a distance. He burst into camp white as a sheet, eyes wild, and didn't stop until he was in the center of us all. "Something followed me," he gasped. Roy grabbed his shoulders. "What followed you?" "I don't know. I couldn't see it in the fog, but I heard it. Footsteps, right behind me, matching my pace." "Animal?" Ben asked. Mike shook his head hard. "No, it was on 2 legs, and when I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it moved. Like it was..." He trailed off, searching for the word. "Playing with you," I finished. He looked at me and nodded. Roy armed himself with a hunting rifle he'd kept in his truck, and a few of us grabbed tools, axes, pry bars, anything that could work as a weapon. We walked out to where Mike had been, moving in a tight group. The fog was so thick our lights barely penetrated it. Everything felt close and claustrophobic. We found where Mike had been working. The markers were still up. But in the mud beside the trail, we found more prints. The same massive, wrong-shaped tracks I'd seen by the river. Only this time, there were dozens of them, circling the area, pacing back and forth, like something had been standing there for a while, waiting. And then, just at the edge of our light, we saw the silhouette. Tall, impossibly tall, standing between two trees, motionless. The fog made it hard to judge distance, but it had to be 7, maybe 8 feet. Broad shoulders, long arms hanging at its sides. Roy raised the rifle. "Don't," Ben whispered. "Don't shoot unless it moves." We stood there in the fog, staring at this thing, and it stared back. I couldn't see its face, couldn't see details, but I felt its eyes on me, felt the weight of its attention like a physical pressure. Then, slowly, it stepped backward. 1 step, 2, and it was gone, swallowed by the fog. We didn't wait around to see if it would come back. That night, nobody left the tents. We kept the generators running, lights blazing, and took shifts staying awake. Roy didn't even pretend we were being paranoid anymore. He just handed out assignments and told us to stay sharp. The fog lingered until morning, thick and gray, pressing against the canvas like something alive. When dawn finally came, the fog lifted as quickly as it had arrived. The forest looked normal again. Trees, rocks, the distant mountains. But normal felt like a lie now. We all knew something was out there. The question was what it wanted. Roy gathered us after breakfast. "We're behind schedule," he said. "Way behind. We need to push east, finish the grid near the rock formations, then we can start packing up." The rock formations were about 2 miles from camp, a series of granite outcrops and overhangs we'd been avoiding because the terrain was rough. None of us wanted to go. But none of us wanted to stay another week either. So, we loaded up the equipment and headed out. The hike took longer than it should have. Everyone was jumpy, stopping at every sound, real or imagined. When we finally reached the rocks, I felt a strange relief. Open space, visibility, harder for something to sneak up on us. We split into 2 groups. Roy, Ben, and I took the northern section. The others spread out south. The plan was to survey, mark trees, and get out before dark. Simple. But then, Ben found the shelter. It was tucked under a wide granite overhang, hidden unless you walked right up to it. At first glance, it looked like a natural cave, maybe 10 feet deep. But when Ben called us over, I saw what he'd seen. This wasn't natural. This was a living space. There were bones scattered near the entrance. Deer, elk, maybe bear, picked clean, cracked open for marrow. Some were arranged in small piles, almost organized. Deeper inside, branches had been stacked in deliberate patterns, lean-tos within the shelter. Old fire pits, long, cold, ringed with stones. And then I saw the toys. That's the only word I have for them. Small wooden figures, carved crude but intentional. Animals, maybe. People. They were lined up on a flat rock like someone had been playing with them. Like a child's collection. "Jesus," Roy whispered. "There's more than one." Ben was staring at a spot near the back of the shelter. "Roy, look." There were marks on the stone wall. Scratches. Deliberate scratches, forming patterns. Not random. Almost like writing. Or counting. I couldn't tell. But someone, something, had been keeping track of something. My skin went cold. This wasn't just a den. This was a home. And whoever lived here had young ones. "We need to leave," I said quietly. "Right now." Roy nodded, but before we could move, we heard shouting from the southern section. Danny's voice, then Jake's. Then the unmistakable sound of something heavy crashing through brush. We ran. When we reached the others, they were backing away from the tree line, tools raised. Mike was on the ground, clutching his ankle. "Something pushed the rig," he gasped. "The drill rig just shoved it over." The rig was on its side, a piece of equipment that weighed maybe 800 pounds. It hadn't tipped. The ground was level. Something had deliberately pushed it over. Fuel was leaking from the tank, pooling in the dirt. And then we heard them. Not one, multiple. Moving through the trees on both sides of us, fast, coordinated. Branches snapping, heavy footfalls. I saw shadows darting between the trunks, shapes that moved wrong, too fluid for their size. They weren't attacking. They were flanking us. "Back to camp!" Roy shouted. "Now!" We grabbed Mike and ran. The sounds followed us, keeping pace but never closing in. It was like they were herding us, pushing us in a specific direction. Away from the rocks, away from the shelter. We didn't stop until we reached camp, gasping, wild-eyed. Roy did a head count. Everyone was there, shaken but alive. Jake was the first to say it. "They weren't trying to kill us." "What?" Danny snapped. "They could have," Jake said, his voice shaking. "If they wanted to, they could have. But they didn't. They just wanted us gone." I thought about the shelter, the bones, the toys, the scratches on the wall, a family, a territory, and we'd walked right into it. Roy looked at me. I could see he was thinking the same thing. "We're leaving," he said. "First light. Pack everything. We're done." But we weren't done. Not yet. Because that night, they came for the camp. We worked through the evening, packing what we could by generator light. The plan was to load the trucks at dawn and be gone by mid-morning. Nobody talked much. We just moved, methodical and tense, like prisoners counting down the hours to release. Roy posted a watch rotation. 2 men awake at all times, rifles loaded, sitting by the main fire. Ben and Jake took first shift. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every sound felt amplified. The hiss of the generators, the rustle of canvas, my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. Around midnight, the generators sputtered and died. All of them. At once. We'd filled the tanks that afternoon. There was no reason for them to quit. But suddenly the camp was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the fire and our flashlights. Ben was already on his feet, rifle in hand, sweeping his beam across the tree line. "Stay calm," Roy called out, emerging from his tent. "Could be bad fuel. We'll check it in the morning." But I knew. We all knew. This wasn't mechanical failure. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter, as if it were afraid to make noise. I stood near my tent, flashlight in one hand, a pry bar in the other, and waited. That's when I smelled it. A stench, thick and wild. Wet fur, rotting meat, something ancient and feral. It rolled into camp like a wave, so strong it made my eyes water. Ben swore under his breath. Jake started backing toward the fire. And then they hit us. Not with violence, with chaos. The first thing I heard was the screech of metal, one of the storage containers being torn open. Then another. Tools clattered to the ground. Fuel cans were kicked over, their contents glugging into the dirt. I spun my light toward the sound and caught a flash of movement, something massive and dark, vanishing behind the equipment shed. "There!" someone shouted, and lights swung wildly in every direction. They were all around us. I could hear them moving, heavy footfalls circling the camp, branches snapping, low guttural sounds that might have been communication. But I couldn't see them clearly. Just shapes. Shadows that moved too fast, too deliberately. One of the trucks rocked violently on its suspension. I heard the snap of a side mirror being ripped off, then the hiss of air as something punctured a tire. They were dismantling our way out. Roy fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the rifle split the night, echoing off the mountains. Everything stopped. For 5 seconds, maybe 10, there was absolute stillness. Then I heard it, a sound I'll never forget. A vocalization, deep and resonant, coming from multiple directions at once. Not a roar, not a scream, something between the two. A call and response. They were coordinating. "Get to the center," Roy shouted. "Everyone together." We clustered around the fire, backs to each other, lights pointing outward. 9 men in a circle, armed with tools and 2 hunting rifles, surrounded by things we couldn't see. And then, at the edge of my light, one of them stepped into view. It stood maybe 30 feet away, just outside the firelight's reach. Easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair, shoulders broader than any man I'd ever seen. Its arms hung low, almost to its knees. The face was shadowed, but I saw the eyes. Reflective, intelligent, watching us with something that looked almost like calculation. It didn't charge, didn't beat its chest or posture. It just stood there, letting us see it, letting us know what we were dealing with. Ben raised his rifle. Roy put a hand on the barrel and pushed it down. "Don't," Roy said quietly. "Why the hell not?" Ben hissed. "Because there's more than one," Roy said. "And if we start shooting, we don't walk out of here." He was right. I could feel them. In the darkness, beyond our lights, in the trees, behind the equipment, watching, waiting. If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. The creature in front of us tilted its head slightly, then turned and walked away. Not hurried, not afraid, just done with us. One by one, the sounds around the camp faded. The circling stopped. The guttural calls went silent. And then there was nothing but the crackle of the fire and our ragged breathing. We stood there for another hour, frozen, waiting for them to come back. They didn't. When the sky finally started to lighten, we surveyed the damage. Fuel lines cut, tires slashed, equipment scattered and destroyed. But no one was hurt, not a scratch on any of us. Jake said it again, his voice hollow. They didn't want to kill us. They wanted us to leave. Roy looked at the ruins of our camp, then at the sat phone in his hand. "We're calling it in," he said, "and we're not waiting for permission." Roy tried the sat phone at dawn. He stood in the middle of the destroyed camp, surrounded by torn equipment and spilled fuel, and dialed the number we'd been given. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. Roy didn't waste time. He told them everything: the footprints, the missing tools, the drone, the attack. He said we were done, that we needed extraction immediately, and that they could keep their money if it meant getting us out today. The voice on the other end was quiet for a long moment. Then it said, "Stay where you are. Help is coming." The line went dead. "Help is coming?" Ben repeated. "What the hell does that mean?" Roy didn't answer. He just stared at the phone like it might ring again and give him better news. It didn't. We spent the next few hours salvaging what we could. Most of the equipment was trashed, fuel tanks emptied, hydraulic lines severed, electronics smashed. It wasn't random destruction. It was surgical. They'd targeted anything that would keep us there, anything that would let us continue working. Mike sat on an overturned crate, his head in his hands. "We're in the middle of nowhere," he said quietly. "No vehicles, no way to call anyone else. If they don't send help..." "They'll send help," Roy said, but his voice didn't carry much conviction. The day dragged on. We kept watch in shifts, though I'm not sure what we thought we were watching for. The forest had gone back to its unnatural silence. No movement, no sounds. It was like the creatures had made their point and vanished. But I kept thinking about that shelter, the toys, the scratches on the wall. This was their home. We were the invaders, and they'd shown remarkable restraint, all things considered. Around 3 p.m., we heard the vehicles. Not our trucks, these were different. Bigger engines, multiple vehicles moving in convoy. They came down the logging road fast, kicking up dust. 3 black SUVs and an unmarked white van. They rolled into camp, and men poured out before the engines even stopped. They weren't dressed like rescue workers. Dark jackets, no insignia, sunglasses, even though the forest was shaded. The one who approached Roy looked like he'd stepped out of a government office. Pressed shirt, clean boots, clipboard in hand. "I'm Agent Carver," he said, though he didn't show any ID. "Environmental protection. We're here to secure the site." "Secure the site?" Roy said. "We were attacked. We need medical evac and—" "Is anyone injured?" Carver interrupted. Roy hesitated. "No, but then there's no medical emergency." Carver looked past him at the rest of us. "We need everyone to gather their personal belongings. Leave all equipment, all documentation, all recordings. You'll be transported out within the hour." Ben stepped forward. "Who are you people? What is this place?" Carver's expression didn't change. "This is a protected environmental zone. Your contract was issued in error. The site is being shut down effective immediately." "Protected from what?" I asked. For the first time, Carver looked directly at me. His eyes were cold, flat. "From further damage." The men in jackets moved through our camp with practiced efficiency. They collected everything: cameras, the drone wreckage, Ben's laptop, even our personal phones. When Jake protested, one of the men simply held out his hand and waited. Jake handed it over. Another team was already working on the equipment, photographing the damage, taking samples from the torn fuel lines. They moved like they'd done this before, like they knew exactly what they were looking for. Carver produced a stack of documents and handed them to Roy. "Standard non-disclosure agreements. You'll each sign one before leaving." Roy flipped through the pages. "This says we can't talk about anything that happened here, that we agree the incident was an industrial accident caused by—" He stopped reading and looked up. "You want us to lie?" "I want you to sign a legal document acknowledging what happened here falls under protected federal jurisdiction," Carver said smoothly. "In exchange, you'll receive full payment as outlined in your original contract, plus a completion bonus. Significant compensation for 3 weeks of work." "We didn't complete anything," Roy said. "No, but you'll be compensated as if you did." Carver's tone made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. "Sign, collect your payment, and go home. Or refuse, breach your contract, and leave with nothing while facing potential legal action for trespassing on federal land." I watched Roy's jaw work. He looked back at us, at the destroyed camp, at the men in jackets moving through our things like we were contamination to be cleaned up. He signed. We all did. One by one, they loaded us into the SUVs. As we pulled away, I looked back at the camp. The men were already dismantling it, working with the kind of speed that suggested they wanted no trace of us left behind. And standing at the tree line, barely visible in the shadows, I swear I saw a shape, tall, watching us leave, making sure we left. They drove us to a motel outside Kalispell, 3 hours south. Nobody spoke during the ride. The men in the SUVs didn't answer questions, didn't make small talk, just drove with the kind of focus that made it clear we were cargo, not passengers. At the motel, Carver handed each of us an envelope. Inside was a check, full contract payment, plus the promised bonus. More money than I'd ever seen at once. Enough to make the past 3 weeks almost worth it. Almost. "Your phones will be returned tomorrow," Carver said. "Rooms are paid for 2 nights. After that, you're free to go wherever you'd like. I'd suggest you go far from here." He left before any of us could respond. We stood in the parking lot as the SUVs pulled away, 9 men holding envelopes and trying to process what had just happened. Finally, Roy broke the silence. "Anyone else feel like we just got paid to forget something?" Nobody laughed. We got rooms. I bunked with Ben. And for a while, we just sat there in the stale air conditioning, not talking. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching. Finally, Ben said what I'd been thinking. They knew. Those government guys, or whoever they were, they knew exactly what was out there. I nodded. The camp was already set up when we arrived. The equipment was top of the line. They were paying triple rate. "Like they expected something to go wrong," Ben finished. "Or they were testing something," I said. The thought had been forming since we left the site. What if we weren't there to clear land? What if we were there to, I don't know, provoke a response? Ben looked at me. "You think they wanted those things to attack us?" "I think they wanted to see what would happen, how they'd react to human presence, how organized they were, how dangerous." I rubbed my face, exhausted. "And now they know. So what do we do?" I held up the check. "We cash these. We sign whatever they want us to sign. And we forget we were ever in those mountains." But forgetting wasn't that simple. The next day our phones were returned, wiped clean. No photos, no videos, no call logs from the sat phone. Even Ben's laptop had been erased, the drone footage gone like it never existed. We were given contact numbers for follow-up questions that I knew we'd never call. The crew scattered within 48 hours. Danny and Mike went back to Spokane. Jake headed south to Colorado. A few guys I barely knew just vanished. Roy stayed in Montana. He had family there. But he made me promise I'd never mention his name if I talked about what happened. "I've got grandkids," he said. "I don't need men in suits showing up at my door." I promised. Ben and I drove back to Oregon together. We talked for the first 100 miles, running through theories, trying to make sense of it. Then we just stopped. What was there to say? We'd seen something big and intelligent and territorial. Something the government knew about and was actively covering up. And we'd signed papers saying we'd never tell anyone. For the first few years, I kept the promise. I cashed the check, paid off debt, bought a decent truck, tried to go back to normal work. But normal felt different now, smaller. Every time I was in the woods, I found myself listening too carefully, looking for prints, watching the shadows. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. News stories, construction projects in remote areas that got mysteriously shut down, logging operations that ceased suddenly due to environmental concerns, mining surveys that disappeared into bureaucratic limbo, and the accidents, so many accidents. Forest fires that started with no clear cause, landslides that buried equipment, workers who went missing and were never found, their disappearances blamed on bears or falls or getting lost. The pattern was there if you knew what to look for. They were protecting something, or being protected from something. And the authorities, whoever they really were managing it, quietly, efficiently, paying people off, making them sign papers, erasing evidence. I called Ben once, maybe 5 years after Montana, asked him if he'd noticed it too. "Every damn day," he said. "I see it everywhere now." "You ever think about talking? Going public?" There was a long pause. "You remember what Carver said about legal action?" I did. "They didn't just mean lawsuits, Tom. Guys like that, they meant consequences. Real ones." He was right. I knew he was right. So I stayed quiet, kept working, kept my head down. Until a few months ago, when I saw the news story. It was a small article buried in the back pages of a regional newspaper. I almost missed it. Construction crew evacuated after equipment sabotage in northern Washington. The details were vague. A remote site, damaged machinery, workers reporting unusual activity. The project had been shut down pending investigation, but it was the location that made my blood run cold. Less than 40 miles from where we'd been in Montana, same terrain, same isolation, same mountains. I started digging. It wasn't easy. Most of this stuff doesn't make national news. You have to look at local papers, construction trade journals, forestry reports. But once I knew what to search for, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Over the past 25 years, dozens of remote projects had been abandoned under suspicious circumstances. Logging operations in British Columbia, mining surveys in northern Idaho, a hydroelectric assessment in the Cascades, pipeline routes in Alberta. Every single one in deep wilderness. Every single one shut down quickly and quietly. The official reasons varied: environmental violations, permit issues, budget overruns. But when I read between the lines, I saw the same details repeating: equipment damage, missing workers, unexplained sounds, projects abandoned overnight with minimal explanation. And sometimes, if you looked hard enough, you'd find mentions of federal environmental agents arriving to secure sites. No names, no agency affiliations, just people in dark jackets who made everyone sign papers and go away. I made a spreadsheet, plotted the locations on a map. The sites formed a rough corridor through the mountain ranges of the Pacific Northwest, stretching from Northern California up through British Columbia. Territories, ranges, areas where something was living and didn't want to be disturbed. And we were learning to leave those areas alone. I wondered how long it had been going on. Decades? Longer? How many people had seen what we saw? How many had been paid off, silenced, sent home with checks and threats? I thought about calling Roy, but I'd heard through mutual contacts that he'd passed away 3 years ago. Heart attack, natural causes. Or at least that's what the death certificate said. Maybe I was getting paranoid. Maybe not everything was connected. But then I found the forum. It was buried deep in the internet, the kind of place you only find if you're specifically looking. A discussion board for contract workers, mostly logging and construction. And there was a thread, barely active, titled, "Sites That Went Wrong." I read for hours. Guys talking in vague terms about jobs that ended badly, projects shut down, equipment destroyed, things they'd seen but couldn't prove. Most of them didn't give details. They'd signed NDAs, just like we had. But they hinted, they suggested. And I recognized the pattern immediately. One post stood out. A guy using the handle Timberjack had written, "Worked a site in '03 near Priest Lake. Same story everyone's dancing around." We all know what's out there. We all know they're real. And we all know why we can't talk about it. But I'll say this, they're not the monsters. They just want to be left alone. We're the ones who keep pushing into places we don't belong. I created an account, started to type a response, then stopped. What was I going to say? That I agreed? That I'd seen them too? Even anonymously, even on some obscure corner of the internet, putting it in writing felt dangerous. Like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I deleted my draft and closed the browser. But I couldn't stop thinking about what Timberjack had written. They just want to be left alone. That had been obvious even back in Montana. The creatures hadn't attacked to kill. They'd attacked to drive us away. The shelter with the toys, the coordinated response, the precision of the sabotage, it all pointed to intelligence, strategy, a society protecting itself. And the government knew. They had to. You don't respond that quickly, that efficiently, unless you've done it before. Unless you have protocols in place, teams on standby, legal documents already drafted. Which meant this wasn't just a handful of isolated incidents. This was policy, systematic management of an inconvenient truth. Keep them hidden, keep us out of their territory. And when boundaries got crossed, clean it up fast and make everyone involved forget. I thought about going public anyway, writing everything down, posting it somewhere it couldn't be erased. But then I'd remember Carver's cold eyes, the way those men had moved through our camp like they owned it, the efficiency with which they'd made us disappear. And I'd think about Ben's words. They meant consequences, real ones. So I stayed quiet. For 25 more years, I stayed quiet. Until now. I'm old enough now that I don't care as much about consequences. Most of the crew is dead or disappeared. Roy's gone. I lost touch with Ben a decade ago. The statute of limitations on whatever NDA I signed has probably run out, though I'm not really sure that matters to people like Carver. But I'm tired of carrying this alone. Tired of seeing the news stories and knowing what they really mean. Tired of the silence. So I'm telling you, all of it. Everything that happened in those mountains in Montana in 1997. Make of it what you will. I still live in Oregon. Different town, smaller, quieter. I don't do contract work anymore, haven't for 15 years. These days I keep to myself, work part-time at a hardware store, and try not to think too much about what's out there in the deep woods. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I pull out the old map, the one with all the sites marked, the pattern of abandoned projects stretching through the mountains, and I add new ones when I find them, because they're still happening. Just last year, a geothermal survey team in northern Idaho reported equipment failures and evacuated within 72 hours. 6 months ago, a timber assessment crew in the Olympic National Forest went home early, citing safety concerns. Last month, a wilderness trail expansion project near the Canadian border was quietly canceled. The reasons are always different. The outcome is always the same. We keep pushing into their territory. They keep pushing back. And the people who know, the government, the agencies, whatever shadowy group Carver represented, they keep managing it, keeping it quiet, keeping us separate. And maybe that's for the best. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what those creatures are, where they came from, how many there are. Scientists would call them an undiscovered species. Cryptozoologists would have other names. But labels don't really matter, do they? What matters is that they're intelligent. They have families, territories. They've survived this long by staying hidden, by avoiding us. And when we stumble into their world, they give us a chance to leave. That's more mercy than we've shown them. I think about that night in the camp. The coordinated attack. The precision. They could have killed us easily. 9 men with basic tools against creatures that could leap 15 feet and bend metal with their bare hands. But they didn't. They destroyed our equipment and let us walk away. They were defending their home. And when we finally left, they let us go. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if we'd stayed. If we'd ignored the warning and kept working. Would they have escalated? Would Carver's people have sent in someone with more than cameras and NDAs? I'm glad I don't know the answer. Look, I know how this sounds. I know some of you are thinking this is just another campfire story, another internet hoax. And maybe that's fine. Maybe it's better if most people don't believe it. But if you're out there working in remote areas, logging, surveying, construction, and you start noticing things, if the wildlife disappears and the forest goes silent, If you find tracks that don't make sense, or equipment goes missing in ways that defy explanation, listen to what's happening. They're telling you to leave, and you should listen. Because here's what I've learned in 25 years of watching this pattern repeat. They don't want conflict. They just want to be left alone. The territories they occupy are vast but finite. There's plenty of wilderness we can avoid, plenty of places we can build and develop without crossing into their ranges. We just have to be willing to recognize the boundaries. The government knows where those boundaries are. They've been mapping them for decades, maybe longer. And they enforce them quietly, through red tape and regulation and environmental protection. It's not perfect. People still wander in. Projects still get started in the wrong places. But the system mostly works. We stay out. They stay hidden. And the world keeps turning, oblivious. I'm telling you this now because I think people deserve to know. Not to panic, not to form hunting parties or launch expeditions. God, please don't do that. But to understand that we share this world with something remarkable. Something that has every right to exist in peace. And if you've had your own experience, if you've seen something in the deep woods, or worked a site that shut down under strange circumstances, or signed an NDA that still keeps you up at night, you're not crazy. You're not alone. Leave a comment if this resonates with you. I'd like to know I'm not the only one still carrying this. And if you want to hear more stories like this, things that happen in the places we're not supposed to go, truths that get buried under official explanations, hit that subscribe button. Because there are more stories, so many more. And maybe it's time they were told. I don't know what happens next. Maybe nothing. Maybe Carver's people, or whoever replaced them, will show up at my door tomorrow. Maybe this video disappears, and I disappear with it. But I'm old. I'm tired. And I'm done being silent. Whatever's out there in those mountains, they're real. They're intelligent. And they deserve to be left in peace. That's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.